Together, they make work as wolf tones, a, quote, exquisitely discordant pairing of sounds. The trio had a show last year at Soloway in Williamsburg, and currently have a show, interrupted by the COVID crisis, at Derek Eller Gallery on the Lower East Side. Wolf Tones have a third show planned at the Oakville Galleries in Toronto, Canada, for the spring of 2022. So without further ado, I'll pass the reins to our publisher and artistic director, Phong Bui, who'll be leading the discussion today.
Thank you very much, Kyle, for the comprehensive introduction to our three friends here. Welcome, Nancy, Red, and Max. I just want to start saying first before I know that you all three want to show a few images to provide some context, but I just want to share with you in that very day, Thursday the 12th, March 12th, having already spent the night in College of St. Rose, meeting some friends there, giving a talk to the students. I came back, I rushed from Penn Station in time to meet you, 4:30 at Derek Eller Gallery. And it was the most fulfilled Pythagorean pleasure, I would say. It was so immersive. It was a most sustaining experience because over the weekend, as we remember, the next day on Monday, March 16, Trump announced his 15 days plan of quarantine. So that evening, however short it was, meeting you, Nancy, meeting you, Max, for the first time. I know Greg for a long time through, of course, through David Levi Strauss and many other friends as early as 2002 or 3. So it was the most, I would say, experience that helped me a great deal over the weekend, that very weekend. It's significant because I realized that it was a remedy, some form of healing, a healing organism, I should say, that evoked all kind of Kabbalion principles such as vibration, rhythm, polarity, cause and effects, correspondence, mentalism, and gender. I mean, all of it. But before we get to ask you a specific question, why don't we now go to Nancy, because I know that you want to show a few images, and we go next to Greg and Max, and then we go back immediately to some of the questions I have for you all.
I'm okay. I'm gonna share some pictures. I'm gonna push that. I'm gonna go there. I'm gonna. Okay. Oh, here. Okay, here I am. I'm gonna go to photographs. Where are the photographs? Why aren't they there? I'm gonna try again. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Take your time. Take your time.
Oh, it's the preview. I don't want the preview. Oh, here. Sorry about that. This makes me nervous.
It's okay. Why don't would you want to wait until you figured out how to do things?
I got them up now. It's all okay.
Okay, good.
I am presenting the stories, work that leads up to Wolf Tones. My position as an artist has always been to be in the middle of. I'm beginning here. This plastic sculptural illustration of an early telephone.
Nancy, I'm sorry, the images aren't showing up.
Oh, they aren't showing up?
No, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
All right.
There? Are they there now?
Your pictures of, your screen is now on view.
Okay, I've got it. Screen. Okay, start broadcast.
That's the right way to continue, right, Max?
Yeah, that's great. Then just open up your application where your
Oh, here they
image
are.
folder. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. Here it is.
Beautiful. You got it. You got it.
Okay. I'm beginning here. This plastic sculptural illustration of an early telephone. It is a romantic, historical, filmic version of a communication device. It is a mass-produced, cheap, decorative object marketed to women for their kitchens. It just is. I have been amused by and appreciative of its complex, simple history for about 40 years. It has appeared in 2 of the large wall works. It is a voice, along with the voices of artists who have generously agreed to be part of these large endeavors. This is a show fastness, slowness, and monstrous beauty, presently locked up at the Derek Eller Gallery on Broome Street in Manhattan. About Wolf Tones, my collaboration with Max Goldfarb and Sterrett Smith. I think our collaboration and the collective work that comes out of a loose agreement to work together is surprising. I would say we love that, and it's why we want to continue working together. This is Moving Left, my wall installation that began all the thinking about this project. Seeing the forest for the trees. That old aphorism is a troublemaker for me, but it is also a motivation, a way to find out more, to see the forest for the trees. But here right now is a sideways move, beauty. I am always intrigued by the different forms of beauty, that which engages the viewer slowly through its presentation of thought and care, a slow growing of understanding. The other beauty is immediate. The viewer falls into it. Wolf Tones totally works with Moving Left. The tumultuous floor display augments the viewer's need to see its fastness, and then slow down to look at Moving Left. Again, the forest for the trees. This is Lisa Robertson's The Baudelaire Fractal. The Baudelaire Fractal, her first novel, appeared a couple of weeks before Fastness, Slowness, and Monstrous Beauty. The book deals with beauty. In its inclusive clarity, it sees the forest for the trees. I can recognize the forest before me. I'm going to quote her fictional character, Hazel Brown. Hazel Brown exists as a viewer, midway between Baudelaire and Lisa Robertson. Again, it's the middle ground. Hazel Brown said, Baudelaire said, art must be stupid. Art must be stupid as a plum, as stupid as an ankle. Courbet had been influenced by Baudelaire, who in his Salon of 1846. I'm going to interrupt here. I'm going to say I was born in 1946. That's 100 years later. Courbet had been influenced by Baudelaire, who in his Salon of 1846 had first addressed the topic of the necessary relationship of art to urban modernity. Beauty, Baudelaire wrote in his Salon, was the beauty of the present only, and was necessarily composed of elements, both absolute and quotidian, whose association caused the sensation of marvelousness, which is modern. Thank you, Lisa Robertson, Hazel Brown, and Baudelaire. Sideways Again. It's 30 years ago, 1990. The Red Coffee Pot and Blue Cat, called Lares and Penates, household gods, two very ordinary objects which can define red, blue, cat, and coffee pot, define mass production for domestic use and consumption of goods by women for decoration. It's 2015, the Aldridge Museum, an installation called Art and Decoration. Richard Klein, the curator, in an early conversation about the show, reminded me of my early beginning. It was a desire to construct a novel on the wall. It was my transition from photography to sculpture. This is a polite, conservative beginning of an unruly past desire for working and making. Controlled Unruly. This is the first of 3 40-foot wall installations or novels. There are about 30 other contributing artists here. This is the Venice Biennale a couple of years later, with Max's solar panels in the middle of it. 2 years ago at Derek Eller, this was called Dress the Form. And here we have the final 40-foot version of novel. It was for Helen Molesworth, Manny Farber, One Day at a Time. And the registrar kindly agreed to be in the middle of this photo for it. A Sentinel, a small sculpture made for Soloways in Brooklyn. Another Soloway sculpture. And this is Soloway, this wonderful gallery in Brooklyn run by artists. It's completely funky. It had a former life as a plumbing business, and before that, probably a tenement apartment. And the space itself became a character in the installation of our first Soloway. We decided just to cram it all together because the space sort of demanded that. And we're back to Wolf Tones 2. The only thing we knew about our installation was that Max's 99 knives would flow from the front of the gallery to the back, and we built everything around that idea. This is the beginning toward the front of the gallery, which is Max's radio antenna and a whole collection of what I think of as my rose garden. And my rose garden began with this sculpture, the Sentinel in the front, which is of cartoon roses on a blue background. And I made that for Max because I thought it was the closest I could ever get to myself making his work. It amused me. And this is Gret and her small emergencies. The sculpture and the name arrived through the workings of making Wolf Tones, and Small Emergencies couldn't be better. One of the spacers that's become a lone spacer, and there you are. I'm finished.
Right. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gret, you want to?
Yeah, I'm just hoping that dinging didn't have anything to do with my, was I hopefully not enabling?
No, it's because of the iPad. I don't think it
Oh,
can show
okay.
up on your computer.
Okay, was worried it might be me. Feeling guilty for no reason. Okay.
Imperfection is part of what we're trying to do. Embrace it. Remember.
I am embracing. I am embracing. Nancy says, Gret, you're all about speed. Whoops, what happened? I thought I was in. Am I not in?
We went back to Nancy.
I stop. I do stop. I'm sorry.
That's okay. And if you want to pick it back up again, Gret.
For all my trouble. All right, go ahead, Gret.
Okay, let's see if I can be graceful here 2 times in a row. No, you seem to have somehow done something with my, oh dear.
Okay.
Oh my God.
How is, oh, Nick, somebody's here?
Hi, Gret. So you can screen share by pressing the share screen button at the bottom of your Zoom window.
Yeah, it's just for some reason my entire thing just, something that happened there.
Collapse? Okay.
Would you like us to go to Max and come back to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
We can also bear with you. This is part of it, like Phong said.
Is it?
It's Murphy's Law.
Oh my God. Okay. Let's see if I show up now. Do I show up now? Why have I got Nancy in front of it? Do you see me?
We see you on the screen.
Not your
You don't-
screen.
Not the images yet.
There you
You're-
go.
Gret.
Yes.
How about now?
Yep.
Ah!
Great.
See it.
I bet you'll never let artists ever take control again. Okay. Nancy says, Gret, you are all about speed in the line. Gret, don't you think that is monstrous beauty? Isn't that what we were trying to get at? Gret, be raucous, be more raucous. We have no interest in replicating anything representationally, right? Frequently, I pick up the phone to hear Nancy jumping right into an energetically delivered question that has a way of staying with me for days. It's not a question that has any answers. No whiff of finality or staleness there. No resting in a pre-existing state. Okay, why can't I go forward now, guys? Our systems are not meshing here very well.
Yeah. We did have rehearsal before, but technology is tricky.
You want to try going, if you're going sideways, try going down or up?
It's not letting me escape, go sideways, or
To unshare and then come back in with the
no, I can't do anything.
Really?
escape.
Escape is not working.
Are you within the program that you want to shift between images in?
Okay, now
There we
somehow
go.
I just was released. I don't know why.
Great.
Okay. The expanding head of a woman, a piece of mind that has survived 40 years. My truck recently returned from the dump, my place of renewal and dismay. Oh, what a world. 3 clay heads that came to represent the Wolf Tones chorus on a bench that I discovered at Nancy's Shop Henry in Hudson, New York. My studio floor with fabric pickings. Nancy's floor as our fabrics and materials and excitement show first form. A piece of a paisley shawl of Nancy's that feels like the Ur piece to illustrate a workmanlike dedication to the process of making, a necessity, a tradition, a commitment over extended periods of time to then be passed down through time as these shawls were originally. This necklace has shown up in conversations with Nancy, public and private, as when she invited me to be a part of Annie Albers, a conversation among friends with Lisa Scull and Robert Gober last year at Hunter College. We've spent countless hours looking at how things are made and of what materials. The measure is taken of the value of these pieces and how they motivate us to act. A 4-part panel of Nancy's in the first Wolf Tone show at Soloway Gallery in Brooklyn, where we first came together. Annette Warehan so enthusiastically encouraged us to have our way with the space. The largest flat surface in Nancy's shop that is heaped with a visual feast from many sources. A close-up of things widely divergent in their form, material, and content. A close-up of sentinels, one of Nancy's singular forms, bringing it to the eye from many sources. A fabric sample in the shop, Japanese. Walks in nature. The randomness of repetitive form. Is this a contradiction? Construction passed on the way to wolf tones. Open forms when building. Soloway Gallery in its raw beauty next to its neighbor, Love Wild. Max's sign and my construction. Under the table with Max. Our first come together, be together. View upon leaving Nancy and Max in Hudson. Plant nursery, plant culture. Well, it's tied up again, guys.
So in order to shift between the images, I think you need to be operating within the program you're sharing through. So it's possible
I haven't changed. I haven't done anything but press one button, one arrow. Oi, oi. And it says I'm screen sharing.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That's
Okay.
okay, Brett. I mean, you have more images.
Okay, there it goes again. Now suddenly it just released. I don't know. The joy of nature at the dump. Our hill at sunset, nature dwarfing a tiny shelter at its feet. The dump is the pump, a fountain of plastic. Sarcophagus of the cultural body at the tipping station, as the English so delicately say, or politely the transfer station, or directly the dump. Fight, eat what you like, and stay waxed. Killer dump vignette as found. Max's studio, my sun baby facing off with Max's Buddha. Juxtapositions, baby, it's all about juxtapositions. What's happening? With all this massive dismantling of group dynamic that we might have known as government, AKA the safety of the people in their United States. Cacophony, a work session. And the thread comes from China. The tipping station offers the image of a woman in song. Even here, an aging yellow, is there something to sing about? Max brings metal and geometry. I bring wildness, untamed and spreading dangerously. Forgotten utility in the woods, a means of production being swallowed back up by nature on a small scale. I attempt to work in a softened wax geometry to play with the metal structure. Cézanne surfaces at the dump. This time, a wire fruit bowl is offered with. My waxed mats and shapes meeting line. A one-off, front and back, may be born of talking heads. The news is always breaking. Another kind of meeting with flowers at the center. What is this bound vessel? What blooms? Clay and fabric, pin cushion takes to life. Home in a garden, that reassuring cycle of growth and decay over time, repeated with alteration. The dump offered a boogie board. I made fake nature with it. Is that fake news? An all over glance, relief at that moment from particulars. Nancy's shop window, another all over. Regular visits to the spring available to anyone who stops. Spring in the hoop house, is speed really possible? Calendula seeds, crescent shaped and pleasantly barbed. Olive oil infused will be balm for the skin, organ of touch. 10 minutes of this and you are changed. 10 minutes of this and you are changed. Flower sentinels arrive in the mix and a garden is started here as well. Is this beautiful? Ezra Pound Peony. I need to admit this, honestly. Some things remain in question. That drive to seep and ooze out, color runs, texture doesn't feel boundaries. This is real, but has limited access. Another texture with no boundaries I so admire. Night shot in the studio. Vertical tunnel passed while thinking tunnel. Hand-sized tunnels become arteries. shelved in waiting, purpose to come. Wolf tones taking shape in knives and sentinels. A singular piece of Nancy's around which so much forms, attempts to move, and attempts to settle. The circular, with and without verticals, drums, buckets, acoustics, clay, paper, fabric, all circles. A visual of Max's structure. Wax mats and clay and fabric combinations, all experiments. Wall work, where combining started and then slipped to the floor and came back up again. This one ended up in the show at Derek Eller. Clay and fabric, base or no base, fabric as environment. Landmark on trips to work with Nancy and Max. Always parked like this. It came to mean I was close to arrival, where the busting through might be accelerated. And the little emergencies, all falling apart and coming together simultaneously. A much desired state. Nancy's Omphallotus arrives at Derek Eller. Jackson exercises his engineering talents to master gravity on everyone's behalf, allowing Nancy to scale the heights. Pablo assists. Singularities, prolonged emergencies, all in debt to the deer dump and the urgency of the moment. Two panels together, moving sideways, and a first trip back to the studio post-pandemic declaration and Derek Eller install. On and on, as Nancy would matter-of-factly encourage. The crew in front of my lens. Thanks for looking.
Great. Thank you, Brett.
Thank you.
Well, as I said, one of my favorite things Kanye was from the crooked timber of humanity, nothing ever came out straight. So we're doing okay. We embrace imperfection. So why don't we come now to Max? Are you there, Max?
Yes, I am.
Excellent. Take it away, please.
Okay, you can see that, right?
Yeah.
Looks good, Max.
Okay. So yes, now I'll share some images of my source material mostly first, and then I'm going to show the direct relationship of those images to my work with representational objects. And then, of course, we can follow this pattern back to wolf tones and this collaboration with Nancy and Gret. So building on the images from Nancy and Gret, you may see how we've been interested in this experiment of intertwining what we've been doing. I think when we look at, we'll take another look at the installation. Years of regular conversations with Nancy. I live in Hudson near her store. So after years of talking with Nancy while sitting in her store, Henry, have really been concentrated on the things we're making, reading, thinking about, and our talk influenced by the environment of the store, which is always, of course, filled with layers of fascinating, curious objects that are always changing, always rotating to and from her studio in this kind of interplay. After introducing me to Gret's work, I appreciate how Nancy invited me and Gret into what's become an extended process of the three of us working together for a time now, making independently and then gathering at intervals to kind of invade and support and look at and learn from one another's work and thinking. I've certainly learned a lot from both of them. I think starting with the raw material of found images that are the origin of my work will orient you to what I'm doing, which I think of as hovering in the transmission between image, text, and object. And then that maybe will make sense as a kind of odd curve in the collaboration. I have the same issue as Gret. Let's see. Okay, there we go. So several years ago, I developed my book, Remote Viewing, with this notion to define an architecture of a project within which to productively make work serially, but to generally unpredictable results. I'm interested in the potential for this publication to operate as a kind of generator of action and production. It's part list. You can see they're, sequenced by chronologically. Inventory, it's a kind of procedural schematic. It serves as what I think of as a literary operator's manual for my studio practice now for a number of years. And the text is based on collecting imagery and rebuilding what I'm seeing in the form of observational writing first. Consistent with Nancy and Gret, I'd like to go through a number of images, which I'll do rather quickly to just fill up the screen and fill up your eyes with a sense of what I'm looking at and identify the language of what I'm responding to. And then I can talk about this one-to-one relationship of the images and the objects that follow and how that kind of fits in with the things that we're making all together, the three of us. So you'll see some recurring themes here in these slides. People interacting with tools, devices, systems in Tableau involving automation, augmentations of abilities, telepresence, construction of mediated environments, reconstructions of bodies, warcraft, feats of engineering, emergencies, rehearsals of sorts, reenactments, sometimes kind of lethal, innovative designs, tools, and devices that anticipate the results of their use. The scenes often depict spectacular realities weighted in worldly phenomena or ordinary interactions that are acted out in extreme circumstances. Epic engineering extends voice and the reach, as well as kind of asymmetric to human scale and ability. So that's just a very quick grouping of things pulled from my archive of found imagery. So this will be a more a real literal example of how I've been working. I'll begin to show some of my works directly alongside their source. The process of mining the descriptions from my writing and from the images, and then playing around. You've seen these appear in one of Nancy's installations already, playing around with the spatial configurations of objects, and then experimenting with the accumulations of the objects that have different derivations. So the elements that I choose to render are sometimes prominent or central in the documentary image, and sometimes more incidental or nearly hidden in plain view of the scenes that are indexed in the photographs. These kind of choices are made to amplify the focus and sometimes change the priorities of the picture and direct what to look at or what I'm looking at. For example, here, this robot that's working with a young autistic child, playing these mallets softly on a drum, and then you see them kind of pushed out of the photograph as what I think of as a kind of artifact. That's a word that, in the way that Gret, and Nancy have pointed out, language is kind of something we talk about in relation to our objects and images, and with Gret's work, the little emergencies, and Nancy's sentinels, I think artifacts, that's maybe a word I use to think of these. You see also this piece alongside one of the first knives I carved and a 3D model printed of a Polaroid land camera, just kind of slightly out of scale. So after the process of making the singular form kind of literal representational objects mostly, I'm ultimately more interested in the relationship among the objects in their own ecology, separated from the specific narrative context that they originate from, and kind of asking, how do these things relate to one another? What relationships form among these interactions, these literal replicas, approximations? What do they carry, having become hybrid image, language, and form? So here, this is a piece of wreckage fallen from a space shuttle, and I was interested in this fellow wearing this map printed shirt, and then recreated a shirt based on the Mercator map, and then zooming in on that map and finding this sort of image within image of the tall ship, and then producing the tall ship. So this kind of a little bit labyrinthine route from each one of my tableaux. So these are signs, tools, extensions of the hand, and they stand for things and situations that the tools have wrought. So this is that sign reappearing again, originally coming from Pipeline. This is, of course, a drone, and then you see a detail in the upper right appear as this panel. Antikythera mechanism, this is an ancient Greek astronomy calculator, and then this is the replica crudely made with cardboard. Dolly, and then a 3D print of Dolly, and then a kind of mutation of a scan of that print. This is a general assembly, and then you can see the metals of commendation kind of blown way up out of scale here. End effector, and then end effector replica. IED, kind of approximate replica of an IED. Found sign, and then kind of a polished recreation or simulation of the sign here installed in a show. Rehearsal of an emergency, and then this is this figure appearing in a show. And then, for example, this would be another one that breaks into multiples. This is a imagined crate with that firearm, that assault rifle, and then this is a sort of second try at that, a double. Orion capsule, and then a kind of panel sewn together from Tyvek. Launch structure, this is a missile launching structure, and then this is what I'm working on that's in my office. Molecule models, shipping containers. And then, so this has kind of come full circle back to our collaboration. More directly, this sign you'll see appear in Solway Gallery among sentinels and Gret's painting on the wall there. And then finally to the installation that's up right now at the Derek Eller Gallery. So we can kind of see how they can collide and how we've really woven them together. So this has really been a way for us to challenge what we speak about in our independent work and expand our conversation. So at that, I will unshare, and as everybody back on their own screen. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's terrific. I learned so much already. Wow. I mean, let me ask a few questions, because I don't want to be selfish here. I want to ask no more than 2 or 3 questions, and then we'll open up to the Q&A section. I feel like collaboration is super rare. in the art world, I mean, I guess the most memorable one was the one that Warhol did with basket in the mid 80s, I think. But then one can always remember that Warhol needed basket to boost up his visibility at the end of his career. And I'm not so sure how well that worked, although I much prefer the one that he also did with Francesco. But and then there, you can think of maybe Jean Tingley performed at the Sculpture Homage to New York. That must have been in 1960 at MoMA Sculpture Garden outside, which with the help by Bell Lab, Vancouver, able to manage to get this monumental kinetic sculpture destroy itself, you remember? And Rauschenberg have a hand in it. I know he put some work as part of that. And I mean, one can think about many other examples too among artist collaboration. But this is so unlikely. You know, I listen to you just now, Max. I love the term epic engineering, asymmetrical structure, surveillance culture, technology, and all of it. And then the opposite would be what, you know, Gret is doing, completely alchemical, where intuition is the key of mobilizing the work, whether making sculpture or painting and whatnot. Nancy have a different kind of wisdom. I would say certain thematic warmth. So it's very unlikely. So the first question is, when did this wolf tone, the first one at Soloway, begin, and how do you guys met? And when, in fact, you can actually sit down and say to yourself, among yourself, let's do a collaboration. I mean, let's share with us that very beginning.
I have to blame it on Nancy. It's all Nancy's fault.
I blame it on Nancy as well. I attribute it to Nancy.
She's a huge.
You want to begin first?
She's an instigator. She's a huge instigator, and I jokingly call her the conductor as well. So she's been doing this for years. She has an amazing way of bringing this out in people and bringing a kind of collaborative energy while not letting any kind of sacrifice of what someone might be bringing to the project. So it's not about a traditional kind of collaboration where there's some sense that you have a shared goal already in mind and you're building towards that goal. It's a really pretty interesting, unique, as far as I can tell, version of what collaboration actually means and the possibilities in it. It's really seems to be about freedom to me. It really loosens things up, and it really mimics, I think, what has to happen in our times where we're so divided, we're so separated, and now physically, literally separated. Yeah. So this is something that Nancy, I think, has been really coming to for a really long time. I mean, I'll let her say something about it, but I just have great respect and real appreciation for. She's got some magic ingredient that allows her to see something in disparate things and find a place for them in close proximity. And maybe like we're kind of butting right up against each other and really challenging each other with our materials, the way that we think. And yet there's really a built-in kind of tolerance. There's a real allowance there that doesn't come naturally, but is somehow made manifest through the tone of how it's set up.
Okay, I mean, do you remember exactly, roughly the time when this happened, Nancy?
I think it was the fall before the April show that Annette Wilhelm invited me to have a show at Soloway. Mm-hmm. And it came out of weekly conversations with Max and realizing that our work was so similar, but at 180 degrees opposite. Uh-huh. And then because of that, I also thought of Gret and how the three of us were equidistant from one another. And I thought that would be just so interesting.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Do you recall the time when the three of you were in the room together? Like me
Um,
talking about.
yeah, no, I don't remember that. Do you remember that, Max?
I just remember one of our annual solstice parties and you walking into my crazy room where I keep all my weird little things and just saying, hey, we need to mix this up. You know, we need to talk more. We need to have a conversation. And you got really close to me and you put that fierce eye of yours right up to me and you said, you know, I see things. I'm feeling something going on here. And you made a complete and utter impression on me that there was some kind of urgency there. And that's, I think, when my feeling for this sense of little emergencies and urgencies and hadn't at all been defined, but I started to have a very visceral sense something was going on, something might happen. And you quickly introduced me to Max, and that's where I remember it. That's where I remember it.
What about you? Do you remember the same thing as Nancy and Brad did, or a little bit different?
Yeah, I think I remember our a conversation where I started to hear about things that that Nancy and Gret had been talking about, and it started to seem compatible with our conversations. Oh, I got a little feedback there. And it's funny because I think on the surface, it's easy to find ways that our work might be in some ways quite different. But I think that where we quickly kind of jibed and found kind of roots of agreement and productive disagreement, or kind of different perspectives of similar things, was in this idea in Nancy's work with found objects of one sort, kind of scouring various sources, finding objects, and Gret going to the dump repeatedly and kind of culling through these remnants, and my kind of mining of photographs is just this idea of paying attention to things that are overlooked that we share. And so I think that was a starting point. I don't remember exactly the room we were in, but I remember that as a starting point in our conversation.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's compelling, and I can't wait to go back and look at it. And I hope that we'll be able to support, encourage the installation as it goes to the next location. It will take different form, as you say. But why don't we do this? I'm going to hand it off back to Kyle so he can open up the Q&A question, because I know that we have quite a bit of question already. Kyle, back to you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So we had a question from Riley. Would you like to ask your question? I can unmute you. There you got it.
Thank you. Thanks, Cal. And thank you all for being here. It's been so great to hear about your work and your collaboration. My question, I guess, might be a little bit selfish. It's directed to Nancy, because you quoted a passage from the Baudelaire Fractal in your presentation, and I've been reading and rereading that book for months now, a bit obsessively. So I had to ask if you could speak a little bit more about Robertson's work. This is the first book that I've encountered of hers, and whether you consider your work to be in dialogue with hers.
It's the first work that I've read of her as well. And I feel very akin to the book in terms of the journey that's presented, Hazel Brown's journey from a sort of rural working class environment to a life of thoughts. And all of the talk about beauty and all of that. The book is basically thoughts about being a woman in this world, thoughts about freedom the freedom and the sort of, what's that word I want? When you're completely ignored, you're disappeared, how that can be a freedom as well to gaining one's knowledge for oneself. I think it's a remarkable book.
Thank you so much. I also think it's remarkable, and it's just really great to hear your thinking alongside of it. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Riley. Next, we have a question from Philip Foster. Would you like to, can I unmute you? Here, you're unmuted, Philip.
Okay, thanks. Hi, a question for each person separately. What, in your view, is the difference between collage and pastiche, or is there no difference?
Well, who wants to jump on that one?
You're there, Grant, go ahead.
I have to admit, I don't pay too much attention or maybe I pay a lot of attention. Maybe the extremes are both true. In terms of boundaries and borders between terms and uses in my work, I especially want to forget a lot of what I have learned in the act of actually doing something. That's not to say that these differentiations aren't really useful in terms of communicating with each other. But those sort of I don't see too much difference between a lot of that in this day and age. In the act of making right now. In fact, boundaries and borders have been one thing that I've been really trying to examine very closely and to either bust through, find some porosity in there, and really try to reinvigorate language and use of terms and use of materials and methods. Somebody else want to jump on that one?
I don't know if I work in either of those modes, but maybe together it's a good question to think of how I guess you're trying to characterize what it is we do together, which I guess I would think of maybe as a kind of a collage, but or more like a bricolage, like a kind of building of something, because the way that we worked on this was we really worked on our own work independently. And we're in close conversation about the kinds of things we're making, maybe sometimes even exchanging images from afar, and then periodically meeting in my studio and everyone showing up with works that were made and introducing those works to one another, and kind of going through this process of cycling things in, cycling things back out again. That was the sort of construction of it that maybe makes you think about collage of sorts. But that's really about the process. I think if you look through the work, I mean, as Nancy was pointing out, hopefully there is this kind of flow of the work, a kind of integration of things, but you can also look at it as a accumulation of a lot of different parts. Almost like, I think of it as a kind of an engine. So, an engine of lots of independent parts that are tactically placed.
And how about with respect to your own work individually?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, collage. I mean, that's interesting. I guess for myself, I'd say the imagery that I'm interested in, this kind of all these found sources, I don't necessarily try to put them together as such, but until they've been kind of processed through this fabrication of the object, which is at that point kind of become separated from that source. I never really look at those things too much in relation to one another as image. Although Nancy, I think you'd probably you'd answer that quite differently about your work, right?
I actually rarely think about those terms. I would classify that in the category of seeing the forest for the trees. I see the trees, and I rarely go out from that to see the forest, which is collage. And occasionally I realize, oh, maybe that's what Max and Brett and I are doing, but I rarely put words to it.
Yeah, it's super true. Not
Thank
easy to categorize.
Thank you for your question, Philip, and thank you for the answers. Next, we have a question from Craig Stockwell about Nancy's work. Here you go, Craig. You're on.
Hello, hi Nancy.
Hi.
So you spoke about a desire to create a novel on the wall, and I'm very interested in this, and interested in the relationship of visual presentation to language, words, sentences, chapters. I think in some ways there's a very obvious connection to presenting any installation, that it in fact becomes a kind of novel. But I'd just be curious to hear you talk a little more about that.
I think that my first influence in terms of trying to learn how to think was reading novels. And I'm going to say I began by, an early source was Henry James. And when I began to read those novels, I was completely, absolutely overwhelmed by what could be said by not saying and what could be said by saying. And then I thought, well, if I can read and understand this, I can want to do it. But I wasn't a writer.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for your question, Craig. Next, we have a question from our very own JC. There, you're live.
Hey, y'all. Thanks so much for this conversation and the poetic presentations. It was cool to see the visual references that you're all interested in. And there was in our Slack back channel, people were like, this is like seeing the inside of people's brains. It was great. My question is for kind of everybody. You frame your collaboration as like around dissonance with the wolf tone, with the idea of the wolf tones. I mean, obviously, like the references are really disparate. The nature from Gret's nature walks to Max's like industrial, military kind of design and engineering. But obviously, like all sounds are made of the same thing. Like they're all waves running through the air. And so, I guess my question is like, do you see yourselves as looking for a line between human and natural? Do you think there is a line? Is that part of what you're thinking about?
I don't think there is a line for me. I see these things as moving, and it's all in a state of motion and flux. It's not something that gets nailed down. It's vital. It's a vital thing. And all of these things are in our lives, are part of how we make decisions, how we work, how we make things, how we live, right down to how we breathe. So that's the interesting part of coming together with people, that you share a certain common drive or motivation, but not the same approach. So you can still bring it. There's some kind of commonality there, but there's also the disparateness, and that's all to me been the beauty of the whole thing, the freedom of it. So it's been a really fabulous, all-encompassing kind of things don't have to get ruled out. And I think that's part of the problem of our time right now. There's a lot of defining, getting things down to smaller and smaller entities, identities, rather than, okay, I have this identity, I have this way of working, I have this way of being, but I'm also bumping up against all this myriad of other possibilities. And I think we have really done something that has to do with our time right now. I think we've really come out of our time. But anyway, that's my ambling response.
Nancy, you have anything to follow? about what Greg just said there? Because I know that you wonderfully allude a lot of interesting questions, particularly the one that define whether collage or pastiche. It's I think that one of the a very beautiful thing about this collaboration is that it has its own visual intelligence, and it's not easy to be pinned down by certain explanation. Obviously, you all came together, you have a coherent desire to collaborate. It was very natural, and you allow all those steps, fall and collapses at time, as Max has mentioned, disagreement, productive disagreement and whatnot. But the idea is that you trust how the collaboration itself, or the spirit of collaboration, that would bring the work along too. So it's more than just providing along the way formulation about every single step that you take. But thinking about rhythm and sound, I think that's very important to the whole collaboration in some way, because after all, the title of the show, of this piece, called Wolf Tone. This is something that I'd like to ask. Was it something that you came up with, Nancy, Grad, or is it Max, or is it all together?
It was Max, after working for a while, and he came up with it, and he should talk about it. Max?
The term, yeah, I like that you brought up this point about dissonance. I learned about wolf tones actually initially from my son, who's a cello player. If you're playing music, or if you're sensitive to sound, then noise is, can be characterized as sounds that you don't want to hear intentionally. And he was talking about how wolf tones are this kind of screeching sound that's generated when you hit a certain note where the instrument itself vibrates at the same frequency as the strings, and it creates this this kind of dissonant effect. And I tend to really like noise, and I like to find noise is many layers of different signals that are undifferentiated. I like the idea of trying to sort through noise. In any case, in one of our conversations, I was talking about that phenomenon, and we both agreed that was a kind of an interesting thing structurally to think about in relation to collaboration, thinking about this idea that though it produces a kind of dissonance, structurally, if you visualize it, it's a sort of, it's a phenomenon in which these waves kind of interrupt each other together. And I think that we agreed immediately that that would be a way to characterize what we were doing, piling work one on top of another, and then sorting it and figuring out ways that we could move from dissonance to something that was a little bit more of a clear signal.
Yeah, well, so it's like another a good manifestation of a temporary autonomous zone.
All things are permitted.
Yeah, a certain time of the day, maybe dusk, where the dog can be a wolf, in that between space, can be activated. But I have this one question I want to ask Nancy, maybe all of you too. During the Great Depression, because of what need to be restructured. I mean, the WPA is a great example, but I was thinking also the Index American Design, Nancy. We just realized that it was headed or directed by a man named Edgar Holger Cahill, who was married to Dorothy Miller, the curator at MoMA. The idea is to produce mass object, for everyone. It's called art for the million, so to speak. It just brought to my mind because of what the two images that you showed to the tail end, Nancy. So I just wonder, since you are famously managed to be an artist, but haven't a store in Hudson, which I've been a few times. You weren't there, but the idea is that the common object, the object of every day, there is an aesthetic that you describe so eloquently in some of your interview, because partly of your relationship from the very beginning as a photographer. You mentioned your relationship with Walker Evans, for example, who also was on the WPA project. So can you sort of share with us a little bit of that aesthetic, that, you know, visceral identification with object, everyday object or thing that you see on the street?
I think I have loved objects perhaps since I opened my eyes and had a need of seeing them. My family had sort of very austere visual house, and I was always looking for trying to see something. And in Walker Evans' photographs and his love of object, I recognized that was a similar love for me, but it was also a growing realization that any object is worth looking at. And I think my life as a collector has begun since I was 18. So it has more informed my art probably than anything else ever. And I've learned so much from objects just by looking at them.
Thank you. Greg, you feel the same way? Slightly different though?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I guess maybe just as a woman with a life embedded in a house, in houses, when one nurtures people in those houses, one brings objects in that will facilitate that nurturing. So I've always associated objects with the care of people. And then, of course, one finds that there are plenty of objects that don't care about people at all, or are used to not care about people. And the difference and the differentiation between those things has been something that recently has very much interested me. And then how much people give meaning to objects. So going to a place where things are discarded, and sometimes they're things that actually are not broken per se, but that person has deemed that no longer useful to them. And I started to just do a sort of sociological study because I had to go to this place anyway. This is how you get rid of stuff in our area. And I decided that I would make this interesting rather than a chore. And it actually became a real fascination. And I got to know some of the people that lived there and what they had picked up or what they dropped off. And now it's been quite a number of years that I've been doing this. But I've always loved objects, the same as Nancy, from the very beginning. My mother realized that I had an issue with things. And when she ripped out some old cabinets that all had glass fronts on them, they were put into my bedroom, even though they were kitchen cabinets, and they entirely lined a wall. And I spent hours arranging things inside of these cupboards in a variety of different ways, and practiced changing what they meant and what they meant to me and to themselves. I mean, in a, you know, obviously not putting words to it that I might do now. But recently, because of, for ecological reasons, climate issues, politics and all of that, it's been fraught on a whole nother level that has really activated this in a way to a level that it hasn't been before. So finding value in things that are discarded, or things that one somewhere, the resources have been taken to make them. Money, energy, people's lives are put to the manufacture of things. So value becomes, you know, what has value? What is value? And how do we as artists negotiate that, the act of making? And when you make something, then you brought something into being, and it's in relationship to every other thing. So that's a kind of an endless preoccupation of mine, and it's something that I very much enjoy. You know, the conversations that I had with Nancy and Max around all of that, our relationship to our work and materials.
Yeah, this is the first time you collaborate together, right?
We've been working, I don't know, it's like a year and a half, going on 2 years or something, that we've been sort of deliberately working on something.
No, this is terrific. Thank you. Max, you seem to have been, you appear to be an artist who have thrived on collaboration. For example, your work with Waveform. I don't know anything about Waveform until this morning. So tell me a little bit about that.
About Waveform? Well, it's a wonderful media arts organization that started off in Williamsburg and then eventually moved upstate to our area. It's kind of just across the river from where we are here in Hudson. And it's a terrific place that has a residency for media artists, people that are particularly engaged with working with the electromagnetic spectrum. So it can mean a wide range of things, people working with light and sound and radio transmission of all sorts as a residency, and there's an archive and a property with some cited works. And I met the people that run Waveform a number of years ago. Let's see, about 10 or 15 years ago, also being in the area, and we did immediately collaborate on a project, and then I've just been involved with them in a lot of different ways. One of their projects that is in the Columbia and Greene County area is that they started a licensed FM radio station. So I've been really, on a just practical level, kind of, I have a program that I do on the station, but I've also been part of the conversation of, the kind of work that they support. But yeah, I have worked I collaborated in a number of different ways, but nothing quite like what we've been concocting here with Gret and Nancy as a kind of studio practice. Really in the past, it's been more in producing more kind of performative events around transmission arts.
Thank you. Like I say, for me, experience the installation have been an incredible healing process. I thought about it, and so it's nice to have you three come in here and share the experience. And I feel that it have tremendous potential for different permutation, different life. And we talk about this too, that it will take different shapes as you go along. So this is tremendous. My last question is that, has it been good for you all this time since the fact that it was literally an hour in the opening reception, and all the work you put into this massive undertaking, has it been also a healing process for all three of you during this quarantine time?
It's fraught. It's good. It's bad. It's all over the place. It's a very rich, very intense time. It's hard not to. It's hard to wrap your head around it. It's I've been alternately in heaven and hell, and sometimes feeling like one is in one hand and one is in the other, and I'm in the middle. And feeling that current running through, a kind of ecstaticness about feeling so lucky that I'm not sick, that my friends and all of that in this time, that I can work, I can keep up on things. But it's been fraught. It's been a fraught time. A lot of suffering, a lot of terrible things. And thank you, Phong, so much for coming up with this amazing venue to help some of that energy find a place to go. So. Well, don't get tired. Don't get tired. You're not allowed to get tired. Ever.
Very energized by this. Nancy, any last words you want to share with us?
Well, I want to thank you, Phong, for wanting to know about wolf tones. And as much as I would like the show to be seen. I'm somewhat calm about it not being seen, and I'm very happy for that. And I think it's due to the energy of Wolf Tones and my knowledge that Wolf Tones will continue.
Yes, as always will. It has and it's always will. Thank you also, Derek Eller, for keeping the show up extended beyond its previous day of the closing reception. I think everyone can always go to the gallery website and look at further details and images and, you know, the list of the works there. It's certainly a pleasure, so I urge you to do so. For now, I'm going to turn it back to our MC, Carl.
Thank you, Phong. And really, thank you, Gret and Max and Nancy, for your wonderful, wonderful talk. So the Rail has a daily ritual of ending our lunch sessions with a poem. So today, our design director, Mike Tully, will read for us. I can get him ready now. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Cal. Thanks, Phong. And thank you, Nancy, Gret, and Max. This was really such a delightful conversation to listen to today. So thank you so much. Today, I wanted to read a poem by Diane DePrima, and it's from her book, Pieces of a Song. And this poem is called The Window. You are my bread and the hairline, noise of my bones. You are almost the sea. You are not stone or molten sound, I think. You have no hands. This kind of bird flies backwards, and this love breaks on a window pane, where no light talks. This is not time for crossing tongues. The sand here never shifts. I think tomorrow turned you with his toe, and you will shine and shine, unspent and underground. Thanks.
Thank you for that choice. That was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us. And please join us tomorrow for science writer Steve Silberman with writer and friend of the Rail, Raymond Foy, at 1 p.m.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you, everyone.
Hey.
Max.
Thank you. Thanks, Cal, Phong, Nick, Sophia,
Pleasure.
everybody.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Rachel.
Hi, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Hi, Rochelle. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Roxanne.
Hi, Roxanne. Hi. Hi. Thank
Hi,
you.
Rachel.
Great talk. Hi, Rachel.
Thank
you. Phong, that was great.
It's I. Have a great lunch, you guys.
So
Thank you,
inspired.
Phong.
Great one. All our friends.